The main cause is the destruction of anything even remotely resembling internal stability in the Near East. The Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the boycott against Iran, the spillover of all of this to Syria, the destruction of Libya, and the result of this is, of course, this huge flood of immigrants. I mean, after all, you have to keep in mind the welfare state in Western Europe existed, of course, before, but that the numbers increased in such a drastic way would not have been possible if in these regions some sort of stability had remained. One almost wishes that Saddam Hussein would be back, that Gaddafi would be back, that Assad would regain his power in Syria, and so forth. And what is the motive behind that? I believe is maybe not in the heads of all decision makers, but of some, of those people who want to create some sort of world state, of course dominated by the United States. The European project is just a sub-chapter in this chapter of trying to create a world state. But what do you need to do in order to create a world state where you can no longer vote with your feet anymore at all because everything is regulated and taxed exactly the same way everywhere? What do you need to do in order to achieve this goal is, of course, to destroy the identity of all nations and countries. And how do you achieve the destruction of the identity of people is you promote a policy of multiculturalism. And this multicultural project, as you can see in front of your eyes, has already made great advances for decades, and now we see that point of culmination has been reached. And if you have multicultural societies, as Rahim has pointed out, plus you have democracy, then you get civil strife, and under some circumstances you get even civil war. And these are, of course, great opportunities to increase state power.
I think the population is, of course, largely brainwashed. I mean, you should just watch German TV. All the journalists, all the politicians tell you, you as Germans with your past in particular, you must do this sort of thing. Most of the help is not individual help, even though that is shown on TV. Most of the help is, of course, social workers. There's an entire industry in the meantime that lives off this phenomenon of the refugees. There's an employment program for social workers that has been created. I still, again, these sorts of things are difficult to assess, but I still think that there's probably a majority in the German public and in most other countries also who take a very sober view on the issue of immigration, and namely, that is the view no one would be against immigration per se. But you take people that you think that will add value to your country, to your place that you like and love. And you want to exclude people who do not add value but are parasites and looters, people who live off other people's work. You cannot express this attitude in Germany. Certainly not in Germany. If you say something like this, you are automatically as everyone who deviates only in the slightest from the politically correct way. In Germany, you're of course immediately called a Nazi if you say something like this. But look at everyone's personal life. Who do you employ, whether it is as house personnel, or who do you want to have as neighbors? You want to have neighbors that somehow increase the value of your own life, increase the value of your own property. And to do this, again, there are some states that obviously do a more reasonable policy than the European community does at the current time. I mean, to take a look at Australia, I think what Australia has done is by and large to be recommended. There is the huge number of boatloads of people from Southeast Asia who wanted to come to Australia were simply turned away. And since that, practically no boat tries to come over. Canada pursues a more reasonable immigration policy than Germany does, because you have to prove that you have certain qualifications, otherwise they won't take you. You might criticize what they look at, what type of qualifications they look at, and there might be certain misjudgments there too, but the principle of all of this, that is, yes, you select people. You want to make your country better.
Without the inflow of money of foreign powers, I don't think ISIS would have come this way. But all kinds of different powers have financed it for a while. Even Iran was affiliated, but it was a short while, and the smallest amount that they invested. But usually, mostly it's Saudi Arabia and Turkey.
And interestingly, Saudi Arabia does not take any refugees. Neither does Qatar take any refugees, despite the fact that they are culturally, so to speak, closer to people from Syria than, let's say, Germans are. Amazingly, there's very little criticism of these countries by Western countries. Why don't you do this? They're also in Syria, there exists the Golan Heights, which is, I think, United Nations controlled territory. From what I know, that's a pretty nice area. There would be plenty of room to house people there. But Israel, of course, prevents that will happen. Israel also doesn't take a single refugee, of course. Pressure should be exercised on those countries who have a responsibility in this whole thing to do their fair share. Some people have also proposed, and I think that should be also considered, it might be much cheaper to pay some states, let's say in Africa, per head. Take these people here, we have 1 million people for you, and we pay you such and such an amount, why don't you take them? And you might even find some willing takers who would accept a deal like this. But this again will not be acceptable to the Western elites. One other aspect I might point out is the dominant ideology in the West, in particular in the United States, but also in Europe, is some form of egalitarianism. That is, all people are just the same. We just have to mold them right, send them to the right schools, and have them educated in the right way, and they will all turn out the same.
you see somehow from the social workers themselves that they obviously did not become Einsteins, but they believe that if people fall into the hands of enough social workers, at the end we will be a world full of Einsteins. And if you believe in all people being the same, all cultures being the same, then of course you adopt an idiotic immigration policy, like it is just the same as if the Germans multiply a little bit. Instead of having 1.5 kids, maybe they create 3.5, and the German population internally grows, that would have exactly the same effect as if you import 5 million people from whatever, Sudan or Nigeria or Kenya or whatever the country is. This is increasingly more people believe in this type of nonsense, and the consequence will be drastic. Nobody takes a position that you should take everyone out. I mean, I emphasized before that of course you want to have productive people coming to your country. And of course I agree perfectly that minimum wages, licensing laws, all of that stuff should be abolished. But we live in a world where we have all these laws, where we have welfare payments that in Germany, for instance, that are higher than middle-class incomes in most countries in the world. And if you have that, and I think in that regard, Milton Friedman, I'm not a great fan of Milton Friedman's, but his insight, you can have a welfare state and you can have free immigration, but you cannot have free immigration and a welfare state together. He is perfectly right in that regard. And I do not see any possibility of dismantling the welfare state at the current moment. And if we let people come in without screening them in some way for their qualifications, the welfare state will astronomically increase. And we do have empirical data that, of course, of all of these immigrants that are coming from non-Western countries, so the majority of them is on the welfare dole. They are still on the welfare dole in the second generation, and on the third generation even more so.